Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, and this episode should be coming to you in the middle of March. So, spring is in the air, stimulus checks are flying, and we now know who the nominees are for the 93rd Annual Academy Awards. And because the Oscars are the biggest event for the film industry each and every year, we are going to be dedicating 2 segments to going over the nominees, discussing the films nominated, and talking about who may have been snubbed. So definitely stick around, as our final 2 segments will be dedicated entirely to talking about the Oscar nominees. Now, in terms of new releases, I did want to talk about the film Happily, which stars Joel McHale and Carrie Bichet. They play a married couple that get into a little bit of a sticky situation and do not have such an enjoyable time when they go on a couple's retreat. Also, I wanted to talk about the film Last Call, which stars Jeremy Piven, where he plays a real estate developer who returns to his hometown, and the film explores that old chestnut regarding what happens when you come home again. But before diving into all that, I want to introduce a new segment on the GSMC Movie Podcast. This show is all about covering the new releases and finding out what Hollywood is bringing to the table. But in my last episode, when I was talking about The Godfather, I really wanted to start introducing a place in the show where I can discuss classic films, so that is something I will be introducing. I have this book, 1001 Movies to See Before You Die. So to kick off each show, I will be diving into one of the films you should be seeing before you die. And the inaugural one I'll be talking about is John Carpenter's The Thing. Now, this 1982 classic covers the tale of a group of scientists on a remote outpost in the Antarctic, where they encounter an alien being that has the ability to take over their bodies. Originally based off the sci-fi classic story Who Goes There, this film is a masterclass in suspense, as well as subversion, and it has a young Kurt Russell as its protagonist. So, in the first installment of this new segment where I recommend classic films, the first recommendation is John Carpenter's The Thing. And for those interested, you can watch it on Amazon Prime Video or download the classic on iTunes or Google Play. So, The Thing will be the classic film I recommend people to watch. And shifting gears, the new release I'm recommending to people is the new film Happily, set for release March 19th in limited theaters as well as video on demand. And as I said earlier, this film stars Joel McHale and Carrie Bichet playing a married couple. And the funny thing about this couple is that the rest of the world thinks that it is a problem that after 14 years of marriage, their spark is still there. So much so that in the world of this film, there is a stranger that comes to their house to give them an injection that will quote-unquote make them normal. And not wanting to have the spark go out of their marriage, Carrie Bichet's character, Janet, clubs him over the head, thus killing that person. Now, this moment is the inciting incident of the film, and from here, they go on a couple's retreat in order to get away from this. And the best way I can describe the film from here is it turns into a modern-day version of Clue, where it's a bunch of people in one location, while evidence of the couple's prior crime keeps popping up, and the real mystery of the film is uncovering who's the person who is essentially blackmailing them. So, a pretty wacky premise right off the bat, and this film is described as a romantic dark comedy. So just seeing all the different areas they go into with this film will be interesting to see. And I always think it's kind of cool when a film pretty much is set in one location. This was expertly done in Rian Johnson's film Knives Out. So it will be cool to see what Happily does when essentially the shoot is just a bunch of actors in a house with the ability to be creative from scene to scene. Although I do hope that this film doesn't have just a bunch of those improv acting scenes. And this is really a personal cause more so than anything else, but I'm really growing tired of those just obviously improv scenes in movies where an actor just goes on a complete tangent, gets completely sidetracked from the plot of the film, and the delivery is so common to the point where it's just they're saying outrageous stuff in a completely deadpan manner. That type of delivery and really that type of acting, I feel, has just gotten so played out in films. And I really believe there are only a few actors that are actually good at it. The person who, probably really popularized this trend, Will Ferrell, I think he's able to do it to a certain level. But seeing his recent work, I'd say that even he's gotten to a point where it's kind of played out. Other people that can do it really well, like Danny McBride and Seth Rogen, have really popularized this method of acting, and unfortunately, I just don't think there are many people that can do it well. I know that the show Community, which Joel McHale used to star in, was a big fan of this method of acting, so I'm sure he's going to attempt some scenes like this. But again, I just think this trend is really played out, and there are a lot of actors that do it that don't do it well. And it really just comes off as lazy filmmaking, where the writers essentially just say it's in the actors' hands to come up with a joke here, so we're going to shoot a bunch of takes of them improving, sift through and find the best ones, and use it. And I just think that's a really poor method of storytelling. We're going to use this one because it's the best of what we have, instead of making a concerted effort to make something good. So, thank you listeners for indulging me in that little tangent and crusade I had to get off my chest. And to be fair, I have no idea if this film is going to be doing that. This could be a film where every line is carefully plotted out. I just get a feeling from the actors involved and the type of movie that this is. There will be a lot of scenes where it was just written, these two characters have an interaction, and from there, it's up to them what will transpire in that scene. And me personally, I'm just getting tired of these awkward scenes that do nothing to move the plot along, do nothing to develop a character, and are simply in the film because this is the best of what we have from all the takes we had the actors improv together. And I have this feeling I'm not the only one, that other audience members are just getting tired of this type of acting and how it's just really played out. And again, I'm not saying don't improv any scenes. If you have a talented actor, give them the opportunity to spread their wings, but it shouldn't be just the default method of movie making, where it's just you have run-of-the-mill actors where on the resume it says they were part of an improv troupe. Great, let's let them just freeball it. It's a lazy way of filmmaking, and at the end of the day, the result is something that has nothing to do with the movie they're in, and whatever comedic value it has is minimal at best. Whew. Thank you, everyone who stuck with me through that. I really don't want to be one of those podcasters that thinks only their opinion matters, but that was something I really needed to get off my chest, and I'm the one with the microphone, so tough noogies. But getting back to this film I have completely stereotyped and profiled, it really does seem like an interesting flick. I mean, just the concept of a married couple still having the hots for each other 14 years in is a fun premise to play with, and the idea that the rest of the world finds this to be such a problem that there is actually a man in black coming with a quote-unquote solution for it is a funny idea to play with, as well as mixing in the idea of this is really a whodunit thriller type movie, as well as being a comedy. So this film will have the ability to make sudden changes from being super serious to being super lighthearted. So it should appeal to a large range of audiences, and when a film is able to pull off those sudden switches, it can make for some pretty cool moments, and as long as they're not overly manufactured or completely out of place, they should help this film walk the emotional tightrope of at one point being a super serious crime thriller, and on the other hand, being an ensemble comedy movie. And it does really impress me when films are able to mix genres like that. Like I said, this film kind of makes me think of it as a modern day version of Clue, but that isn't the only comedy film it reminds me of where the main cast is confined to one location. In terms of the type of film, where it's a big comedy ensemble cast, this kind of reminds me of the 2013 film, This Is the End, which, to be a bit of a hypocrite, that film was amazing, and it was largely improvised. Now, not to get up on my soapbox again, but that film did come out at a time when this method of acting hadn't been absolutely driven into the ground. And that was a cast of incredibly funny comedians that were all friends, and essentially during the filmmaking process, they were just trying to make each other laugh. And when you have a cast like that doing this type of acting, it definitely translates to the audience enjoying it. So, like with most things, there are no absolutes. This Is the End was able to pull off that style of acting and produce an incredibly funny movie. Maybe I'm being too rough on Happily for just assuming that's the type of film it's going to be, and thinking that this cast won't be able to pull off the same feat. So I do have to give them a fair chance. I'm just so sick of the type of acting where it's just completely deadpan while delivering the most ludicrous, outlandish dialogue, and the juxtaposition of being completely serious while saying completely ridiculous things is supposed to be so frickin' hilarious. I think that method of acting is just so played out and just so commonplace that it's lost all effect. And I'm sorry for these little mini rants I'm going on. I'm getting off the soapbox, and we're just going to be talking about the film from here on out. And I will start that by giving you a rundown of the cast. Like I said earlier, Joel McHale will be in the leading role, and most people will know him from his starring role on the show Community. And I won't make any comment on his history as an improv actor. Opposite McHale, as his wife Janet, is Carrie Bichet, who was a part of the cast in the disastrous spin-off season of Scrubs, but since then has found success in series like Narcos and *Halt and Catch Fire*, where she starred as Donna Emerson. Other cast members include Natalie Zeal, who's probably best known from her roles in Justified and TBS's The Detour. Additionally, Breckin Meyer will be in this film. Just wondering what really ever happened to that guy. The only major thing I've been aware he's been in recently is the show Franklin and Bash, where he played one of the two. So it's good to see him back in the movies. Also in the film is Paul Scheer, who most people will probably know from the series The League, where he plays Andre. And the funny Stephen Root is in the film, known from his classics like Office Space and Dodgeball. He also plays Fuchs on the HBO series Barry. So the film does have a very talented cast with a lot of comedy veterans in it, as well as a few newcomers. And the film is written and directed by Ben David Grabinski. His name is literally the name Ben, with the name David right next to it. No hyphen, no space or anything, so that's interesting. And he is probably best known for the current revival of Are You Afraid of the Dark on Nickelodeon. But all in all, Happily looks like a film that has a lot to offer from a storytelling standpoint, where it has one plot where it's a mystery thriller where a couple is trying to uncover who is trying to blackmail them, a comedy film with an ensemble cast that will all be confined to one location for the duration of the film, and a sort of romance film where one couple that are still going hot and heavy 14 years into their marriage will essentially have to shirk off the outside criticism, saying that for some reason, caring about your loved one and significant other in such a passionate way after such a long time is somehow abnormal. So, all in all, the film Happily will be released Friday, March 19th. It is set to debut in certain theaters, as well as being available through video on demand. So be sure to check it out. Right now, however, we are going to take a quick break on the GSMC Movie Podcast. But be sure to stick around, as coming up, we'll be talking about the new film from Jeremy Piven, Last Call. So any fans of the former Entourage actor, definitely stick around as we take a look at his new film that details the story of a local success story, once again coming back to where it all started, and him being met with a crossroads of whether or not to stick to the life he's created for himself or dive back into his humble beginnings and invest in his hometown. So you'll definitely want to stick around to hear about the film Last Call and you're also going to want to stick around until the end of the show, where we'll be talking about the Oscar nominations. At the time of recording this podcast, they were just released, and there's a lot of interesting nominations and a few history-making moments that came out of this batch. So, because the Oscars are the ultimate event in the film industry, and because there's so much to get to in this year's crop of nominations, we'll be dedicating 2 segments to the Academy Awards, which I think is definitely necessary given the crop of films that are up for nominations this year. With so many films touching on controversial topics, filmmakers now being able to push the absolute limits of storytelling, and all of this will be coming off of not only one of the most unique years for the film industry, but one of the most unique years in human history. So, being able to take a night and honor filmmakers, actors that provide a little escape from the real world when we've probably needed it more than ever before. This year's Academy Awards will be a much-needed respite from reality. So to give a recap of what will be happening for the rest of the show, coming up we'll be talking about the film Last Call, and after that it'll be all Oscars till the end of the show. So be sure to stick around. The GSMC Movie Podcast will be right back after this quick break.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, and in our last segment, we just talked about the film Happily, the new dark comedy thriller starring Joel McHale and Carrie Bichet, where they play a married couple who, while on a couple's retreat, have a dark secret of theirs unearthed, and they have to find out who is blackmailing them. This film has a lot of elements that will make it a good comedy to watch, as well as an exciting whodunit. So for all of you interested out there in checking out Happily, it will be released March 19th, and will be available via video on demand. And I want to remind everybody that the last 2 segments of the show will be entirely dedicated to going over the Academy Award nominations. There is a lot to get to and a whole bunch of films to cover, so be sure to stick around. You're not going to want to miss any of it. Right now on the show, I am going to switch gears and talk about a film called Last Call. This new sentimental comedy from IFC Films stars Jeremy Piven as a real estate developer who returns to his hometown for a funeral and is faced with the fact that while he's changed a lot, his hometown and the people in it have not changed a bit. While he is back in his hometown, he tries to get enough signatures so he can develop and build a casino. But his ultimate test in this movie seems to be whether or not he'll follow through on developing the casino or purchasing a local bar. And personally, I don't think I could have found a better movie to talk about the week of St. Patrick's Day than a stereotypical Irish flick, where the plot of the movie is choosing between advancement and development, or just going back and having another beer. So the film Last Call seems like a pretty good encapsulation of what it means to be Irish. But lightly veiled Irish stereotyping aside, this film is ultimately about the main character's choice between staying true to his roots or if he's constantly going to be evolving and changing. And that's a fairly positive message that everyone can relate to. What parts of ourselves from our past are we willing to incorporate who we are in our present, and what parts of our past are we looking to disassociate ourselves with in order to grow and develop? And this is where I understand the use of setting this in an Irish neighborhood and having those not so veiled Irish stereotypes. The Irish are very stubborn people. They adhere to tradition, and when change comes, it's often met with resistance. The time when I was fortunate enough to visit Ireland, I took a bus ride from Galway to Dublin, In between those two cities on opposite coasts, it is absolutely nothing but farmland. As a people, the Irish do not embrace change. So the metaphor of having the main character trying to develop a new business venture in a slow-to-change environment is a good way to illustrate that point. And the fact that it is a casino, which is sort of becoming the new hot business boom, with gambling being legalized in more and more states. There are also a lot of negative connotations that come along with gambling, such as addiction, and the seedy individuals, whether rightly or wrongly, that are associated with the institution. And that's another struggle that the main character has to deal with, because while he's going around trying to get support for building a casino in the area, he's claiming it's going to be great, it's going to revitalize the community, bring in a lot of money for the town, but in his heart of hearts, does he know that it's going to cause a lot of negative effects to the town? So is he willing to sell out his hometown community in order to benefit himself and make himself a lot of money? And this idea of development is not just a plot point in this movie, it's really something that's going on across the country. America's in a second wave of development. Infrastructure everywhere is being updated, and you can call it gentrification if you want, but the point is, neighborhoods and cities that have been the same for pretty much a century are going through major changes. Whether it is having something major like a casino put in, or on a much simpler scale, just having new houses put in. And this even goes beyond real estate development in this country right now. What have the nonsensical political arguments been about over the past, I don't even know, decade? One side, the quote-unquote conservatives, don't change anything, nothing's wrong, we don't have to change a thing. And on the other side, the quote-unquote progressives, the system doesn't work, the system is flawed, we have to abolish it all and start over again. I'm not going to get into that argument because I'm as sick of it as most of you listening out there are, but I do understand certain parts of it. I can see logic in the conservative principle of not making hasty decisions without knowing the repercussions of them, but I can also see the perspective in the progressive party where they're saying we need to change things because society has advanced more in the past 40 years than it had in the previous 200. Now, is the film Last Call a critique or commentary on the two different ends of the political spectrum in America right now? Who's to say? And if it is, I really don't want to talk about it because I'm really sick of just the two ends of the spectrum digging their heels in on their side, saying nothing but this is absolutely wrong without any real attempts at a compromise. So that's all the political commentary I'll give, but I'm sure that that is an element that will play a role in the film Last Call, just given the fact that there's the main character who is described by people in his hometown as a sellout. He wears suits and he's all about finding his next money-making endeavor. He works for a person that is only concerned with the bottom line and how much money something like building a casino is going to net them. Whereas his friends from the hometown are more concerned about hanging out and having a good time than they are much anything else. And if you wanted to thumb through the book of political archetypes, I'm sure that you could get the greedy businessman from the conservative section and the blue-collar barfly from the liberal section. So I apologize to everyone out there for all the political talk, but I do think it is going to be an element in the message of this film, even if it's very heavily veiled. I do believe that that theme will have an undertone throughout the film Last Call. But at its heart, this film is really just about the conflict with the main character having to choose between being loyal to his hometown and the community that helped shape him, or if he is willing to sacrifice those connections in order to better his own situation. And I do believe that's where the title Last Call really comes from. As we all know, Last Call is the phrase used by a bartender at the end of the night when essentially you can get your last drink now before we pack everything up for the night. So the customer at the bar has to decide between getting one more drink and continuing, or whether or not they're going to play it safe and abstain from that one more drink. Now, for this film, I haven't really sorted out whether or not having one more drink is going forward with the main character's planned real estate development, or if it's to symbolize him embracing his hometown roots, kind of leaning towards that direction. And that meaning, because what is a more symbolic gesture of embracing your Irish roots than having another drink? My oh my, we are just a pack of walking stereotypes. But in all seriousness, the last call in this situation is the main character, whose name is Mick, by the way, and we couldn't have given him a more on-the-nose Irish name if we called him Fergus Mick O'Brien. But that's okay, this is a movie, subtleties for books, and while we're on that subject, be sure to check out the GSMC book review podcast. But getting back on track, this entire film is Mick's last call. It is where he has the choice of getting another drink and continuing a behavior that he's grown up around and is familiar with, or to deviate from the norm and do the responsible thing for himself by abandoning old habits and moving on to the next thing in his life. And let's take a look at the two scenarios that would play out when last call comes around. You get another drink, you're still a part of things. You're still a part of, let's call them, the traditions of your community. Conversely, if you don't get a drink, you are probably doing something that is more responsible for yourself. You're giving yourself an opportunity to sober up faster, and you are giving yourself the opportunity to be in a better position the next morning. So to boil down all that amateur Freudian analysis into a concise point, this film is about the main character Mick coming to the last call on who he wants to be. And I understand when I phrase it like that, it is cheesier than sticking a baby bell in a fondue pot, but I really do believe that's what the film is trying to relate. There are going to be times when you have to make difficult decisions that will fundamentally change how you see yourself and make you examine what values you really hold dear and which ones you're willing to sacrifice. The main character of Mick, which I just still can't get over the fact that they went so on the nose in naming him Mick, but in this film he's going to be forced to choose between his own personal career advancement and developing himself outside of his hometown, or staying loyal to his roots and the community that he came from. And the thing here is both of those are very important things. You should be wanting to be the best version of yourself and trying to create as much for yourself as you can, in addition to staying loyal to the people that you've known your entire life. But unfortunately, the world isn't so simple where you're just able to have both, and that's the main crux of the conflict in this film, is that he's going to have to essentially choose between two things that mean a lot to him. And that will be a compelling struggle to watch throughout the course of the film. And for those of you listening that are worried, oh no, this is going to be a super sappy, heartstrings type movie, it's really more of a dark comedy that has a few sentimental moments in it. From watching the trailer, I'm pretty sure there are two different clips of one-night stands parting and saying goodbye to each other. And a good chunk of this movie is going to revolve around Jeremy Piven's character Mick, which again I don't think could be a more on-the-nose character name unless they named him Murphy O'Sullivan. But the story mostly revolves around Irish McGee reuniting with his friends from high school. So think of Last Call as one part American Pie in terms of a group of hooligans hanging out and having a good time, one part Tommy Boy, where the hometown kid is trying to revitalize and restore his community, and a very low-stakes version of Sophie's Choice, where the main character does have a difficult decision to make, but it's nothing to the level that Meryl Streep's character had to make in that film. But this movie, Last Call, I think has a lot to bring to the table in terms of making the audience think. This isn't going to be one of those films that draws people in by its all-star cast or amazing CGI spectacles, but it's really going to be a film that brings people in on the emotional tenor of the film. And there is a lot to unpack there, from the story of how the local boy does good and becomes successful after leaving, then coming back to his hometown, seeing how it hasn't changed a bit, and the conflicting emotions he'll face because of that. Then ultimately meeting the crossroads of who you want to be going forward. Do you want to stay loyal to the community that helped shape you? Or are you willing to sacrifice that to advance yourself further in your own career? So there is a lot to unpack in this film, and I think the cast will do a tremendous job at telling that story. Like I said, Jeremy Piven is in the lead role of Mick, who they might as well have just called Angus MacLeod. We get it, he's Irish. But also in the main cast is Tareen Manning, who most people will probably know from her turn in Orange is the New Black, where she played Tiffany. Bruce Dern is also in the film, who most people will probably remember from his Academy Award nomination back in 2014 for Nebraska. Jamie Kennedy is also in the film, and it's just nice to see him back doing something. The Son of the Mask really did a number on his movie career. Some other notable cast members include Sherry O'Terry, formerly of SNL, as well as Kathy Moriarty, who first rose to fame in the Robert De Niro classic Raging Bull, where she played his wife, Vicky LaMotta. So it's nice to see that after all these years, her career is still going strong.
But once again, for all those interested in checking out Last Call, the film is set for release March 19th and will be available via video on demand. The film is rated R, so viewer discretion is advised. And to give a final recap of the film, Jeremy Piven plays a real estate developer named Mick, who returns home to his blue-collar neighborhood. And while he's there, he tries to drum up support for a new real estate project, a casino. But during all of this, he needs to decide on whether or not he wants to follow through with his plans of glory, or if he wants to settle down and buy the humble Irish bar that has been a staple in his community. And just what better film could I be talking about on the week of St. Patrick's Day? So to everyone listening, I hope you have an enjoyable St. Patrick's Day. Be safe. But right now, we're going to take a little break on the GSMC Movie Podcast. But do not go anywhere, as the next two segments will be dedicated entirely to the Academy Award nominations. There's a lot to get to, and there are so many different films worth talking about, in addition to diving deep into some of the lesser-known categories and find out what they're all about. So be sure to stick around. I'm your host, Richard McDonough, and we will be right back on the GSMC Movie Podcast.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome back into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, and I just wrapped up talking about the new Jeremy Piven film, Last Call, the film that takes a look at a local success story returning home and explores the concept of whether or not you really can go home again. And that film will be available Friday, March 19th via video on demand. So if you're a fan of the local boy returning to help his hometown in the vein of Tommy Boy, check it out. But right now, we will be switching gears into the Academy Award nominations. And like I said at the beginning of the show, because this is the major event of the film industry, we will be talking about this for the next two segments. So let's not delay, as there is a lot to get to, and let's get right into it. I will be talking about the individual categories and the nominees in those categories, but I wanted to start off by just talking about some films that have multiple nominations. And the film with the most nominations going into this ceremony will be the film Mank, which scored 10 total Academy Award nominations. And this film is the biographical drama about Herman J. Mankiewicz during the time he was developing the script for the movie Citizen Kane. And not to criticize the film Mank, as I do love me some Citizen Kane, as well as Gary Oldman, who plays the titular character, but this film, right off the bat, just screamed Oscar bait to me. From the movie being filmed in black and white, to its premise being based around a character that is prominent in the history of Hollywood, and off of that, this film just romancing the idea of filmmaking in general. Because the Academy loves some self-referential movies, whether it be something like The Artist that was a major flash in the pan and since then hasn't really had much staying power, or just the sheer amount of the praise that the film La La Land garnered to the point where it was mistakenly announced as Best Picture. Not to say the film Mank isn't worthy of all its nominations, but it's just fairly obvious Oscar bait because Hollywood sure loves themselves some Hollywood. But we have the film Mank with 10 nominations, and there are 6 films nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including The Father, Judas and the Black Messiah, Minari, Nomadland, Sound of Metal, and The Trial of the Chicago 7. So there are multiple films being recognized in multiple categories. And to dive into one of the categories I feel is probably one of the most hotly contested nowadays is Best Visual Effects. Just the absolute amazing things filmmakers can now commit to screen due to the many advancements in filmmaking technology. I don't know how the Academy whittled this down to just 5 movies in this category, but the nominees are the feature-length Boomerang Post, Tenet, is nominated, which is Christopher Nolan's latest film that details the story of a time heist. And I joke about this being a feature-length Boomerang Post, but the visuals in this film are definitely stunning, so it's well-deserved here, and them being recognized with a nomination for Best Visual Effects. Next in this category is the one and only Ivan, which is a Disney film that takes that new technology they've pretty much perfected of having live-action computer-animated animals and puts them in a circus where Sam Rockwell voices the main character Ivan. And just from seeing a few clips of this film and how lifelike these animals really seem, they are definitely a worthy inclusion in this category. Next up in this category is the live-action adaptation of the Disney film Mulan, which I'm sure is being recognized for the many landscapes and set designs that were present in the film. Most of them were CGI, yet they appeared as if they were tangible and physically built. Also nominated for Best Visual Effects is The Midnight Sky, starring George Clooney. And whenever you have a film that centers around the landscape of outer space, the visual effects is of the utmost importance, bringing those incredibly unique visuals to life. So it's nice to see that the team on The Midnight Sky is being recognized for their efforts. And the final nominee in this category is Love and Monsters, the action flick that is set in a post-apocalyptic world after an asteroid strike. So with all those elements, the film needed to contain a lot of crazy landscapes as well as major action spectacles, for which the production team is now being recognized for. So that is the category for Best Visual Effects. And moving on to the next category is Best Film Editing. And this is one where I just don't understand how Tenet is not nominated for this category. Given that this film had so many moments that were being played forward, then being reversed, I just don't understand how something as sharp as Tenet, that clearly had so much of the work done on the film, done in the editing room, isn't getting recognized here. So that's my first snub I'm going to mention. But not to take away from those that were nominated for this award, and I do hope I'm pronouncing all their names correctly. We have Yorgos Limprinos for The Father, the film that stars Anthony Hopkins as a man coming to grips with his own mortality. Also in this category, we have Chloe Zhao for Nomadland, where she seemingly did everything on this film, as she was the writer and director, and earned herself a ton of Golden Globes for her efforts. She is also being recognized with an Academy Award nomination for Best Film Editing, along with Frederick Throval. I definitely didn't pronounce his name right, but he is nominated for his work on Promising Young Woman. Next up, we have Mikhail E.G. Nielsen for his work on The Sound of Metal. And finally, we have Alan Baumgartner for The Trial of the Chicago 7. So there you have it, the 5 nominees for Best Film Editing. And it's really important that we don't overlook the contributions that these people make to the film process in general. Editing essentially takes all the raw components of a film and transforms it into a coherent narrative. So to all the great editors out there, thank you. And thank you to these 5 who are being recognized with an Academy Award nomination. Next up, I want to get into the sound and music categories, starting off with Best Sound, which sounds like a very broad award name, but this award is given to the film that had the best sound mixing, sound design, and sound editing, so essentially it's given to the film that has the best audio components going for it. And the nominees for Best Sound in a Motion Picture, we first have Greyhound, a film written and starring Tom Hanks. This is a war film set during World War II during the Battle of the Atlantic. So, of course, when there's a film that has to mix the real-life sounds of war engines, like planes, boats, missiles, explosions, all of that, it is an incredibly difficult task to combine all those things while also garnering a visceral response from the audience. So for its efforts, Greyhound has been nominated for Best Sound, along with Mank, which will be the first of many times I am mentioning this film, so I won't dive too deep into it here, as I'm going to be covering it a lot throughout the rest of the show. But congratulations to the sound production team on the film Mank. Next up in this category is another Tom Hanks film, and that is News of the World. This film centers around Tom Hanks trying to return a young girl to her original birthplace, and it is set in frontier times, largely in the American wilderness, so mixing in a bunch of different sound elements to that audio track must have been difficult, so here they are, earning an Academy Award nomination for their efforts. Up next in the category of Best Sound is the film Soul, which again is another film that you have not heard the last of on this show. And with Soul being an animated film, the work of mixing in all the voiceovers from the actors pre-recording their lines to make it match up with the animation, in addition to mixing in all the music that the movie Soul featured, it's definitely a worthy inclusion in this category. And the final nominee for Best Sound in a Motion Picture is The Sound of Metal. So it wouldn't be right if this film wasn't included in this category. Mostly because this is a film about a punk rock drummer that is losing his hearing, so a lot of elements in the film, when it comes to sound editing, is really doing a lot to help you identify with the character and to put the audience in a position where they understand what this character is experiencing. So when the sound is not only an element of the film, but one of the main storytelling devices, the film it's in should definitely be nominated for this category. And to recap, the 5 nominees for Best Sound in a Motion Picture are Greyhound, Mank, News of the World, Soul, and The Sound of Metal. And staying in the realm of sound when it comes to a motion picture, we are going to move on to Best Original Score. Nominated here is Terrence Blanchard for Da 5 Bloods, which is a film from Spike Lee where 4 aging Vietnam veterans return to the country they fought in order to find the remains of their fallen squad leader. That in and of itself is a very emotional premise, so I can only imagine that the film has a score to match that emotion. Also nominated for Best Original Score, once again, is the film Mank, and I can only imagine, with this being set in the age of big band music, that this film not only has a score that encapsulates the emotion of the story being told, but also the time period it is set in. Another film in this category is Minari, which was honored with the Golden Globe for Best Foreign Language Film, and here it is being recognized for its tremendous score. And earning another nomination for its contributions to filmmaking in terms of sound is the Tom Hanks film News of the World. And just from hearing the score in the trailers, this film had a truly epic sound to it, so it's nice to see it get recognized in both these categories. And the final nominee for Best Original Score is the film Soul. And there's not much more to be said on this film, given that so much of it was based around the sound and the music introduced in it. So there you have it, the 5 nominees for Best Original Score. Recapping them, it is Da 5 Bloods, Mank, Minari, News of the World, and Soul. And moving on to the other musical category, the Academy Award for the Best Original Song, we have Fight for You from Judas and the Black Messiah by Her. which actually just won a Grammy, so it has to be one of the favorites in this category. Also, we have Hear My Voice from The Trial of the Chicago 7 by Daniel Pemberton and Celeste Waite. Next up, we have the song Husavik from the movie Eurovision Song Contest, The Story of Fire Saga by Rikard Göransson, Savan Koche, and Fatmax Gusin. I hope I pronounced those names right, but I doubt it. Next up, we have the song Low C from Life Ahead by Diane Warren, and this song has already claimed the Golden Globe and Satellite Awards for Best Original Song, so it also has to be one of the favorites heading into this award ceremony. And finally, we have Speak Now from One Night in Miami by Leslie Odom Jr. and Sam Ashworth. So there we have the nominees for Best Original Song: Fight for You, Hear My Voice, Husavik, Low C, and Speak Now. So there you have it, the nominees for Best Original Song. And moving on to our next category, which is Best Hair and Makeup Styling, which is often one of the categories that helps transform actors into the characters they are playing. First up in this category, we have the film Emma, which is about a young woman who keeps tampering with the love lives of her friends. Next up in this category is the film Hillbilly Elegy, starring Amy Adams and Glenn Close, which is the story of a Yale law student who returns home to her family in Ohio after an emergency. And the actors in this film look absolutely nothing like themselves, so it's easy to see why this film was nominated. Also nominated in this category is Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which was set in 1920 Chicago, so anytime you're transcending time, matching a thing like the hairstyles to authentically fit into the time period of the film is always a challenge. And another film in this category that had to face the same issue is once again the film Mank, that had to match up the characters in the movie with the time period of the 1940s. And the final nominee in the category for Best Makeup and Hairstyling is Pinocchio. And anytime you're adapting a fairy tale into live action, the character design is of the utmost importance. So here you have it, the 5 nominees for Best Makeup and Hairstyling: Emma, Hillbilly Elegy, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Mank, and Pinocchio. And in our next category for Best Costume Design, it's pretty much the exact same nominees, but we're trading out Mulan for Hillbilly Elegy. So the nominees for Best Costume Design are Emma, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Mank, Mulan, and Pinocchio. 2 very interconnected aspects of making a film, so it's not surprising to see that so many films are overlapping in being nominated for Best Makeup and Hair Design, as well as Best Costume Design. Moving on to our next category, which is Best Cinematography. This award is obviously given to the best cinematographer for their work on a motion picture, and cinematography is a pretty abstract concept, but it's essentially just the magic of how you use the camera to capture the story. And the nominees in this category are Sean Bobbitt for Judas and the Black Messiah, Eric Messerschmidt for Mank, Darius Wolfsky for News of the World, Joshua James Richards for Nomadland, and Pheidon Papamichael for Trial of the Chicago 7. So hats off to those cinematographers for the unique ways they contributed to making the films they worked on so great. Moving on to the next category, which is Best Production Design, which was originally called Best Art Direction. And this category essentially recognizes the movie that contributed the most to telling its film story solely through the visuals that were presented on screen. And in this category, the nominees are The Father, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Mank, News of the World, and Tenet. So congratulations to all the art directors on those films that were able to find a visual tone for their films that is now being recognized by the Academy. So, thus concludes our first half of Oscar nomination coverage, but we still have a lot more to get into, so don't go anywhere. We are going to be taking a quick break, but coming up we still have categories like Best Director, Best Picture, all the acting categories, Best Original and Adapted Screenplays. So we really are just getting started here, so don't go anywhere, and the GSMC Movie Podcast will be right back.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, and I'm halfway through my coverage of the Oscar nominations. I covered a lot of them in the previous segment, but we still have a lot more to get through, so we're just going to jump right back into it. We will be kicking off this segment with the Best Animated Short Film. The nominees in this category are Burrow, a 2D animated film from Disney, which follows an animated rabbit digging a tunnel and continuously accidentally intruding on some of her neighboring animals. Next in this category, we have Genius Loci, which is a French animated film about a young loner character named Renee. Next up in this category is a more somber entrant, which is called If Anything Happens, I Love You, where it follows two parents that are dealing with the death of their daughter who was killed in a school shooting. And this entrant proves no matter what the medium, you can still tell a powerful story. Next up in this category is the short Opera, which is a South Korean animated short that is described as a look at humanity on a loop. I am not really sure what that means, but it must have been thought-provoking. And the final nominee in the category for Best Animated Short is Yes People, which is an Icelandic animated short that follows an eclectic mix of people facing everyday challenges. These all sound compelling for different reasons, but to recap, the nominees for Best Animated Short Film, we have Burrow, Genius Loci, If Anything Happens, I Love You, Opera, and Yes People. And moving on to the next category, which is Best Live Action Short Film. First up, we have the short Feeling Through, and the title of this short is a play on words, given that the story details the connection between a teenager and someone who is deaf and blind, and quite literally needs to feel their way through the world they live in. Also nominated is The Letter Room, which stars Oscar Isaac as a prison officer who's transferred to the mailroom, and he soon gets involved in the lives of the inmates receiving mail. Another nominee in this category is The Present, which covers the topic of teenagers with disabilities. Another nominee is the short Two Distant Strangers, which is a short that involves a cartoon artist constantly trying to get home but being thwarted by a deadly encounter, and is forced to repeat this over and over again. Listeners to this podcast may recall I covered a movie with a similar premise, and that was Boss Level. And the final nominee for Best Live Action Short Film is White Eye, which details the struggles of African migrants in the country of Israel. So, there you have it, the nominees for Best Live Action Short Film, and they are Feeling Through, The Letter Room, The Present, Two Distant Strangers, and White Eye. And staying in the realm of short films, we have Best Documentary Short Subject, and the nominees in this category are Colette, which documents the powerful experience of a woman having to go back and relive her memories from being in France during the Nazi occupation. The next nominee is A Concerto is a Conversation, which details one person's family lineage from them living under Jim Crow laws in Florida to the modern day where a jazz pianist is now playing the Walt Disney Concert Hall. Next up in this category, we have the short Do Not Split, which details the anti-Sen China movement. which details the threats to democracy that have occurred in Hong Kong. Next up is the documentary short The Hunger Ward, which details the efforts of 2 female healthcare workers fighting starvation in their community of Yemen. And finally, in this category, we have A Love Song for Latasha, which is a detailed documentary about Latasha Harlins, who was killed at the age of 15 by a convenience store owner. So to recap the nominees for Best Documentary Short, we have Colette, A Concerto is a Conversation, Do Not Split, Hunger Ward, and A Love Song for Latasha. Sticking with the theme of documentary films, but moving on to Best Documentary Feature, we have Collective, which tells the story of a group of investigative journalists in Romania trying to uncover a public healthcare fraud. Next up in this category, we have Crip Camp, which details how some camp members of Camp Junaid, which is a summer camp for people with disabilities, and how those campers would later go on to be advocates for disability rights. Next up in this category, we have The Mole Agent, which follows the story of a private investigator hiring an elderly man to go undercover in a nursing home in Chile, and the relationships he forms while there. Next up is the documentary My Octopus Teacher, which documents the year filmmaker Craig Forrester spent off the coast of South Africa and the bond he formed with a wild octopus. And the final nominee in this category is Time, which documents the story of Sybil Fox Richardson and her fight to free her husband Rob, who is serving a 60-year sentence for a bank robbery. So once again, the nominees for Best Documentary Feature are Collective, Crip Camp, The Mole Agent, My Octopus Teacher, and Time. Our next category is Best International Feature, and first up we have Another Round from Denmark, which centers on a group of friends who essentially find out that they find their lives more enjoyable when their blood alcohol level is above a certain point, so they continuously drink and then have to deal with the repercussions of living that way. Next up we have the Mandarin film Better Days, which details the story of a bullied high school girl and a teenage street thug, and how they improve each other's lives. Making its second appearance is the Romanian film Collective, as in addition to being a documentary, there are acting scenes in it. Next up is the Arabic film The Man Who Sold His Skin, which details the story of a man who offers his back as a living canvas and is exhibited in museums, and learns that he sold more than just his skin. And the final film is Ko Vitis Adi, the Bosnian film about a UN translator who ends up saving more than just her family. So, nominated for Best International Feature Film, we have Another Round, Better Days, Collective, The Man Who Sold His Skin, and Ku Vitas Adi. In our next category, we have Best Animated Feature Film. First up is Onward, which follows the story of 2 pixie brothers. Next up, we have Over the Moon, which is an animated film about a girl who builds her own rocket in order to try to meet a goddess. Next up, we have a Shaun of the Sheep movie, Farmageddon, which is a spin-off of the Wallace and Gromit animated cartoon, in which a flock of sheep have to help an alien get back home so they are not detected by the Ministry for Alien Detection. The next nominee, of course, is the Disney Pixar film Soul, which has already won the Golden Globe for Best Animated Feature, and deservingly so. And the final film nominated in this category is Wolfwalkers, which details the story of a young hunter who has set out to hunt a pack of wolves, but encounters a type of sorceress that has the ability to turn people into wolves at night, and this hunter has to choose between embracing this new way of life or following up on the task that her father has set her. So once again, the nominees for Best Animated Feature Film are Onward, Over the Moon, a Shaun the Sheep movie, Farmageddon, Soul, and Wolfwalkers. Alright, now we are getting into the heavy categories, and we'll kick that off with Best Adapted Screenplay. And this award is given to the film with the best screenplay adapted from other source material. Nominated is Borat's subsequent movie film, and this screenplay was simply adapted from the character of Borat. Next up, we have the screenplay for The Father, which was originally a play. We also have Nomadland, which was adapted from a book of the same name, as well as One Night in Miami, which was also based on a play. And the final nominee in this category is The White Tiger, which was based on the novel of the same name. So in the category for Best Adapted Screenplay, we have Borat's subsequent movie film, The Father, Nomadland, One Night in Miami, and The White Tiger. Moving right along to Best Original Screenplay, we have Judas and the Black Messiah, which was written by Will Bergson and Shaka King. We also have Minari in this category, which was written by Lee Isaac Chung. Also nominated is Promising Young Woman, written by Emerald Fenow, in addition to The Sound of Metal, which was written by the brothers Darius and Abraham Madar. And finally, we have The Trial of the Chicago 7, which was written by Aaron Sorkin, for which he has already won a Golden Globe. So to recap, the nominees for Best Original Screenplay are Judas and the Black Messiah, Minari, Promising Young Woman, Sound of Metal, and The Trial of the Chicago 7. All right, here we are getting into the acting categories. First up, in Best Supporting Actress, we have Maria Baklavac for her role as Tutar in Borat's subsequent movie film, Glenn Close in Hillbilly Elegy as Bonnie Mama Vaughn, Olivia Colman as Annie in The Father, Amanda Seyfried as Marion Davies in Mank, and Yeon Yu Jung as Suja in Minari. Once again, the nominees for Best Supporting Actress are Maria Baklavac, Glenn Close, Olivia Colman, Amanda Seyfried, and Yeon Yu Jung. Moving on to the category of Best Supporting Actor, we have Sacha Baron Cohen for his role in The Trial of the Chicago 7 as Abby Hoffman. Then we have Daniel Kaluuya for his portrayal of Fred Hampton in Judas and the Black Messiah, for which he's already earned a Golden Globe in the same category. Leslie Odom Jr. is nominated for his portrayal of Sam Cooke in One Night in Miami. Paul Ricci is nominated for his role of Joe in Sound of Metal. And Lakeith Stanfield is also nominated for Judas and the Black Messiah, where he played Bill O'Neill. So the nominees in the category of Best Supporting Actor are Sacha Baron Cohen, Daniel Kaluuya, Leslie Odom Jr., Paul Rossi, and Lakeith Stanfield. Moving on to the category of Best Actress, we have Viola Davis for playing Ma Rainey in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. We also have Andrea Day playing Billie Holiday in The United States versus Billie Holiday. And with their nominations, this marks only the second time in history two African American women will be contending for the award for Best Actress. And they will be competing against Vanessa Kirby, who is nominated for her role of Martha Weiss in Pieces of a Woman, Frances McDermott as Fern in Nomadland, and Carey Mulligan, who played Cassandra Thomas in Promising Young Woman. So once again, the nominees for Best Actress are Viola Davis, Andrea Day, Vanessa Kirby, Frances McDermott, and Carey Mulligan. Moving on to the Best Actor category, we have Riz Ahmed for his portrayal as Reuben Stone in Sound of Metal, Chadwick Boseman for his performance in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. This obviously comes after his tragic death, and he has already earned a Golden Globe Award for his portrayal of Levy Green. Also in this category is Anthony Hopkins for his role of Anthony in The Father, Gary Oldman as Herman J. Mankiewicz for the film Mank, and Steven Yeun for his portrayal of Jacob Yee in Minari. So once again, the nominees for Best Actor are Riz Ahmed, Chadwick Boseman, Anthony Hopkins, Gary Oldman, and Steven Yeun. Moving along to Best Director, we have Thomas Vinterberg for Another Round, David Fincher for Mank, Lee Isaac Chung for Minari, Chloe Zhao for Nomadland, and Emerald Fenow for Promising Young Woman. And the final category is the ultimate award that every picture is trying to win, and that is Best Picture. So to give you the nominees, we have The Father, Judas and the Black Messiah, Mank, Minari, Nomadland, Promising Young Woman, Sound of Metal, and The Trial of the Chicago 7. So there you have it, the 2021 Oscar nominations. We covered a lot of information, and there were a lot of historic firsts this year. We're seeing the first ever Asian American actor get nominated for Best Actor. For the first time in history, we're seeing 2 female directors nominated for Best Director, in addition to seeing 2 Asian directors nominated in the same year. So there is a lot of history that could be made at the Oscars this year. But as with every year the Oscars will make history, I definitely have to get on my horse and check out all these films that have garnered nomination, whether it's for filmmaking, directing, acting, or those nominated for Best Picture. And I definitely recommend that those listening do the same. The 93rd Academy Awards ceremony will take place April 25th, so you still have time to check out all the great films. And in this year of topsy-turvy craziness, take a little time to escape into some incredibly told stories. But for now, I have to say goodbye, and I just want to thank everyone again for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. And I want to remind everyone, if they haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, as well as write us a nice review. Those really help us out. And if you haven't already, check us out on our social media pages, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Until next time, I've been Rich McDonough, and go see a movie.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.